Now, as I said before, when I spoke to Greg Barnes to invite him to be part of this forum, he was quick, very quick, to assure me it wasn't his fault. He was the campaign director for the Australian Republican movement at the time of the referendum in 1999, and he then took over from Malcolm Turnbull as the head of the ARM. He's an author, political commentator and barrister, and he operates from the Republic Chambers in Hobart's Battery Point, and his email address is republic1@AusEmail. He's here to give us all the good Aussie mail on why we're not a republic. Please, Greg Barnes.
I should say I inherited Republic One from Malcolm Turnbull when he owned AusEmail. AusEmail no longer exists. In the world of the internet, it is a very, very old email address. Would be one of the oldest in the world, I think, Warwick. I'm going to pick up from where Marianne left off, and that talks about how you re-engage with the community on this issue. The well-known English writer George Monbiot says that the age of purely representative democracy is surely over. It's time for people to have their say, and he said that in the context of the drafting of the new Iraqi constitution in 2005, where he observed that the problem was that the Iraqi constitution was produced in a way that was symptomatic of the problem afflicting almost all of the world's representative democratic processes. That is, the deliberations were back to front. The members of the Constitutional Committee, shut inside the green zone in Baghdad, argue over every dot and comma. Then they present the whole thing to people for a yes or no answer. The question and answer are meaningless, which is what Monbiot wrote back in 2005. In the context of the Australian Republic, whilst it cannot in a literal sense be compared with the drafting of a constitution by the Iraqi people or the people of any other nation that's been torn apart by conflict and which is using constitutional process to bring harmony and peace, the more general observations that he makes about the limitations of purely representative democracy in the 21st century does have applicability to the Republic debate. By this I mean that the traditional processes by which a Republican model is likely to be arrived at, be it by a parliamentary committee, another constitutional convention, or worse of all, in the confines of the cabinet room, these are all flawed for the reasons that Monbiot describes. They are all cases in which the deliberations are back to front. The Australian people are presented with a process and a model or models by the machinery of representative democracy, machinery which we're increasingly seeing is today very rusty and little trusted by the community it's supposed to serve. To achieve genuine consensus and national unity on the type of Republican model will require a sense of public ownership. Not only is your own voice heard in these public discussions, but you have to hear others, and you have to be confronted with the need to compromise. Here I want to introduce the concept of deliberative democracy, a process which informs, breaks down myths and fears and prejudices, brings a community together. It ensures that not only are the representatives of our democracy deciding process and substantive questions, but it empowers, alongside that, the essence of Australian democracy, the people themselves. It's a bottom-up rather than top-down approach, all essential elements of a future Republican debate. Deliberative democracy has very noble roots. The first Chief Justice of the United States, James Madison, Alexis de Tocqueville, John Stuart Mill, Jürgen Habermas and John Rawls are all cited as agitators of the deliberative democratic tradition. And the rise of deliberative democracy, and I'll come to what it means in a moment, in its country of origin, the US, has been phenomenal. One analysis says that around 50 million Americans say that they are involved in some form of deliberative democracy project each year. It's a common tool that's used in many parts of the world, from Finland and Brazil, and it's used to facilitate reform in problematic areas of public policy such as constitutional reform, healthcare, electoral reform and the like. The way it works essentially is that in a deliberative democratic process, a group of people is selected at random, and they come together over a period of time to discuss a particular area of public policy, and then they come up with recommendations. Now, it's used at the council level, it's used in the US state level, and it's used, as I said, at a national level. What it does is that the beauty of deliberative democracy is that it involves unengaged citizens, not the activists. In other words, you don't have a group of activists sitting around lobbying for their slice of the cake. You get diverse views, it's based on discussion and dialogue, and you get a meaningful judgment as a result. And I'm going to give you an example of deliberative democracy which I say could be applicable in the next inevitable Republic debate. And that was in British Columbia in 2004. The BC government decided it was going to establish a citizens' assembly consisting of one man and one woman from each electoral district, each constituency, and 2 Aboriginal members. They were chosen at random, and that got away with the problem that you had in the 1998 Australian Constitutional Convention, where you had political parties effectively running interference in the election and selection of delegates. The Citizens' Assembly was formed to reach consensus on a new electoral system. 2 commentators, and I like this quote because I think it really summed up what happened in BC, and they said that a seemingly apathetic public can come alive when presented with a real opportunity for civic action. Though the Assembly members had their expenses covered, they attended many meetings at considerable inconvenience, and attendance was nearly perfect. That tells you something. And the Assembly showed that ordinary citizens are capable of careful deliberation and sound policy judgments. In other words, people were going to the polls with information, real information about the initiative, rather than the slogans that had accompanied what we had in the Republic debate. The BC Citizens' Assembly was unsuccessful, I should say, in the end. And it was unsuccessful, although it got 57 or 58% of the vote. You needed to get 60% of the vote in British Columbia to change the electoral system. But it was a formidable task, and it's a process that's now been picked up in other Canadian provinces. The way it was made genuinely independent of lobby groups and political parties was that the process was conducted by the BC Electoral Commission. It sent out letters of invitation to 16,000 British Columbians. Their names were picked at random from a computer on the voters list. And then from that pool of names was chosen a list. So it is completely random. There is no way that political parties, despite their wherewithal, and no way that lobby groups can infect the process when it's run in such a way. Now, to ensure that you get engaged people, what they did in BC was that they were asked to declare if they were interested in joining the Assembly and to confirm publicly if they were eligible. Then those who said yes had their names put into a hat, and then we had this random draw that I talked about a moment ago. Only 5 of the initial 158 members withdrew, and they were for personal reasons, and sadly 1 member died soon after being selected. They then had substitutes put in their place. Now, its success, it was universally seen around British Columbia as a success. There's no way electoral reform could have seen the light of day in the form of a vote if it had purely been dealt with by a partisan political process. There would have been opposition from the opposition parties, inevitably and naturally, and it would have been bogged down in a parliamentary and representative democratic process for a number of years. This was a way of taking it out of that. Such a process could easily be adopted by Australia to further the Republic debate, and here's how it could happen. You could have an initiative of COAG, which of course is the meeting of the Commonwealth, the states and the territories, and having them involved in a formal way is important because each jurisdiction's constitutional arrangements are altered by a move to a republic. You could have a random selection process along the lines of the BC Citizens' Assembly process of, say, 300 Australians, man and woman for each of the 150 electorates, I think there are 150, and Aboriginal representatives and co-chairs of the exercise, similar co-chairs to those that we had in 1998. Ian Sinclair and Barry Jones, I think, universally are thought to have done a very, very good job. You, of course, in that group of 300, you would have monarchists, direct electionists, minimalists, and those who are undecided on the question of a republic. In other words, you'd have a cross-section, a true cross-section of views about the process and about the model. Now, the role of a deliberative assembly on the republic could be to deal with fundamental questions as to whether or not there should be a plebiscite, then a referendum. In other words, do you want a republic or not, and then move to a referendum on a model, or simply go to the issue of the model and a referendum. It could determine whether or not there should be one republican model, a number, or a number and the alternative of maintaining the status quo, all of which could be put to the Australian people in a vote. These assemblies, the beauty of these assemblies and the deliberative process is that it's flexible. You can have hearings, you can listen to constitutional experts, you can call in lobby groups, you can get the political parties in, you can hear them all. But you as a citizen have the right at the end of the day to reject or not what is being said. Importantly, and to make it work, the decisions that emanate from the Republic Deliberative Assembly's deliberations would have to be binding on Commonwealth, state and territory governments. So that makes certain that it is the Australian people who would be deciding the what, when and how in relation to constitutional reform, not the Australian Parliament. The latter's only role would be to pass any necessary mechanical legislation to enable a plebiscite and referendum to take place. Now, this view, the BC model, is one model. There are other models of deliberative democracy. But I know John Uhr at the Australian National University has previously argued for such an approach, because he says that what happened in 1999 was, it's illustrative of what he calls the deliberative deficit. And he says that the deliberative deficit refers to the imbalance between, on the one hand, resources available to strengthen community deliberation on the one hand, and on the other hand, the deceptions and misrepresentations of many referendum activists which weaken the deliberative process. He wasn't talking about me, of course. He does point to, and we have had a deliberative democracy process which was quite significant during a Republic campaign. In the weeks leading up to the referendum, we had what's called Australia Deliberates weekend in Canberra, where you had a deliberative democracy process. What was interesting about that was that at the start of the weekend, 50% of those who were participating wanted a directly elected president. That had collapsed to 20% by the end of the weekend. I'll finish on this note. If Australia wants to have a republic, and it should have a republic, and a republic is inevitable, they are entitled to do so in an atmosphere of rational deliberation, not simply the sloganeering. And it's critical, if we are going to have a political debate about a republic, that it is not couched, and because a republic can never be couched in terms of self-interest. A republic won't create jobs, and to say that it will is a nonsense. But to use deliberative democracy for these sorts of constitutional issues, to engage with the Australian people in their own constitution and their own system, to challenge that sense that Marianne talked about earlier of being comfortable, to say, is this really the constitution we want? A constitution drawn up by forelock-tugging lawyers in the 19th century with some reverence to the monarchy? Or can we do a lot better with a Bill of Rights and a republic, etc.? Let's do that, but let's do it through a deliberative democracy approach, so that all Australians have a genuine concern about the matter, and to return to what George Monbiot said, show that it's not simply the political and media elites arguing about the merit of an Australian democracy. Thank you.
Thanks, Greg.